The seat they gave humanity was the smallest one in the chamber, pushed against the far wall behind the Orovin delegation, where the light didn't quite reach. Yuna had been sitting in that seat for 6 years. She knew the exact number of scratches on its surface, 43. She had counted them during the long sessions, when no one translated the jokes they made about her species. Today, she would not be sitting. The council chamber on Halaxis Station was built to intimidate. The ceiling curved upward into a dome of living crystal that shifted colors with the mood of whoever held the floor. 12 delegations filled the tiered ring, each species given a space shaped to their biology. The Valith sat in reinforced cradles that held their massive exoskeletal frames upright. The Orovin clustered in a connected hive seat, their insectoid bodies clicking and twitching in shared thought. The Solari floated in a gravity-suspended water sphere, their long translucent bodies drifting like slow curtains. And Yuna stood at the central podium, 5'4", in a gray suit, holding a data tablet she did not need because she had memorized every word. The High Speaker, an Orovin elder whose compound eyes reflected the crystal light in fractured rainbows, opened the session with a phrase Yuna had heard 100 times. It meant, roughly, the lesser matter. It was how they always introduced humanity's agenda items. Yuna smiled. She had been smiling in this room for 6 years. Her face knew the shape of it, the way a soldier's hands know a rifle. She began her address. She spoke in Valith first, then Orovin Trade Common, then the old Solari tonal dialect that most translators couldn't handle. She laid out the history. 40 years of provisional status. 40 years of compliance with every trade restriction, every territorial boundary, every inspection demand. Humanity had not violated the expansion treaties. The colonies in the Denuri Belt were within the zones allocated in the original compact. The Council's own records confirmed this. The Valith representative, a war commander named Torek, who had personally led campaigns against 11 species, adjusted something on his console during her closing argument. He was checking his schedule. Yuna saw it. She kept talking. She finished her address with a formal request for arbitration under Section 9 of the Founding Charter, bowed to the chamber in the traditional manner of each species present, and stepped back. The High Speaker asked if any delegation wished to respond. No one did. The vote took 4 minutes, 11-1. The Solari voted no. The crystal dome turned a deep, bruised red, the color it always turned when war was declared. Yuna had looked up the color months ago, when Dohan first told her this day was coming. She had wanted to be prepared for it. She was not. The chamber filled with the low harmonic rumble that the Valith used instead of applause. The Orovin clicked in synchronized approval. Other species made their own sounds of agreement. The noise pressed against Yuna's chest like a hand. The High Speaker addressed her directly for the first time in 6 years. The translation came through flat and procedural. The human delegation is advised to vacate Halaxis Station within 1 rotation. Diplomatic protections are hereby suspended. Yuna nodded. She turned to walk out. On her way to the door, she passed each delegation's section. She paused at each one. She thanked them in their own language, not the trade common version, the intimate, difficult, native tongue version that most off-worlders never learned because it required understanding the culture behind the words. She thanked the Valith in their chest-voice battle register, the one reserved for honoring worthy opponents. Torek looked up from his console. She thanked the Orovin in high formal, using a grammatical structure that acknowledged a debt that would never be repaid. The High Speaker's compound eyes went very still. She thanked the Solari in their deep-water dialect, the one they used for mourning. The Solari representative drifted closer to the edge of its sphere. It looked at her with something she could not name. Not pity, not admiration. Something older, something that knew how this ended. The door closed behind her. The corridor outside the chamber was long, white, and empty. Her footsteps echoed in a way that made her feel like the only person on the station. In 6 years, She had never walked this corridor alone. There was always a handler, a liaison, someone assigned to make sure the human didn't touch anything important. She reached an alcove near the shuttle bay and stopped. She leaned against the wall. The wall was cold. Alien architecture never got the temperature right for humans. Too cold or too warm, never the middle. She opened a private channel to Earth, encrypted, routed through 3 relay points that Dohan's people maintained off the books. Tejo answered on the first tone. They voted yes, Yuna said. Silence on the line. Not shock, something else. The sound of a man setting down a weight he had been holding for a very long time. I know, Tejo said. His voice was the same as always, low, unhurried, like weather rolling in from the coast. We've been ready for 9 years. 9 years. She had been playing diplomat for 6 of those years, smiling, bowing, thanking, sitting in the smallest chair, and the whole time, the machine had been building behind her. She was the curtain, the smile they were supposed to watch, while the real work happened where they couldn't see. She had known this, of course. Dowan had briefed her before her first day in the chamber. But knowing it and feeling the vote land in her chest were different animals. Yuna, Tejo said, come home. On my way. She boarded the shuttle. The cockpit was small, human-made, and the temperature was right. She sat in the pilot's chair and placed her hands on the console. Her diplomatic insignia, the small silver pin that marked her as Earth's voice to the galaxy, was fastened to her collar, where it had been fastened every day for 6 years. She unpinned it, held it in her palm. It was lighter than she remembered. She set it on the console and started the engines. She did not look back at the station. She did not need to. She had memorized it the same way she memorized everything, thoroughly, permanently, and with the understanding that memory was a record, not a chain. Behind her, through the viewport, Helax's station shrank into the dark. The crystal dome was still red. Ahead of her, Earth was waiting. 600 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel, at the edge of the Sol system, and the light they displaced turned the dark into a bruise. Torak stood at the command platform of the Ravager of Silences, the Valith flagship that had broken the spines of 11 civilizations. His exoskeletal frame towered over the bridge crew, each of his forearms resting on a different tactical console, his chest plates scarred with campaign markings that other species read like a warning label. He had spent 40 cycles as a war commander. He had never lost. This was not arrogance. It was arithmetic. His sensor officer reported the human defense grid. A few orbital stations, some scattered patrol vessels. Maybe 40 ships total, most of them small. Torek made a sound deep in his chest. Amusement. He had mobilized 600 capital ships for this. It was like bringing a flood to drown a candle. He opened a broadcast channel and transmitted the standard Valith terms of submission. Surrender your orbital infrastructure. Ground your fleet. Accept occupation and species reclassification. The terms were the same ones he had delivered to 11 worlds. The words were old enough to be tradition. The response came 2 minutes later. Not a surrender, not a plea. A set of spatial coordinates deep in the outer ring of the Sol system, past the last planet, in the cold belt of rock and ice where nothing lived and nothing mattered. And 3 words in Valith battle register. We'll be here. Torek laughed. The sound cracked across the bridge like stone breaking. His officers joined him. The human species had been assessed. Emotional, short-lived, Class 3. Their ships were slow, their weapons were crude, and their bodies broke if you looked at them with bad intentions. The fleet adjusted course toward the coordinates. 600 ships moved like a wall of iron through the black. On the carrier Paektu, hidden in the debris shadow of a captured asteroid, Jinsu pulled up the fleet tracking display and watched 600 red dots crawl, toward the kill zone. His engineering team stood behind him. Nobody spoke. The display hummed. Jinsu had not slept more than 4 hours at a stretch in 9 years. He had been 22 when they gave him the first piece of alien technology to reverse engineer. A broken Valith drive core, recovered from a border skirmish, the Council never acknowledged. He had taken it apart in a basement lab, rebuilt it better, and then built things around it that the original designers would not have recognized. The kill architecture, floating in the outer ring, was his life work. Stealth platforms buried in asteroids, sensor-blind minefields calibrated to Valith hull frequencies, drone swarms that learned from every exchange and adapted faster than anything biological could react. 9 years of engineering compressed into a region of space that looked on every scan like nothing. "If this doesn't work," Jinsu said to his team, "none of us will be alive long enough to be embarrassed." His lead engineer, a woman named Boyoung, who had been with him since the basement lab, handed him a cup of coffee. "It'll work." "You don't know that. I know you, same thing." He took the coffee. His hands were steady. That surprised him. 12 asteroid positions across the outer ring. Hana ran final checks with her squad leaders. The 7th Rapid Response Unit, the Strays, were packed into boarding craft bolted to the dark sides of rocks, invisible to any sensor built in the last 1,000 years. Her soldiers were young, loud, and handling their terror the way she had trained them to, by turning it into noise. "Commander, if one of those big bugs steps on me, do I get hazard pay or just a nice funeral?" That was Kyung-ho, her point man, who dealt with fear by making it everyone else's problem. "You get both," Hana said. "I'll give the eulogy myself. It'll be short." "How short?" "He was annoying. He died. Next item." Laughter crackled across the comm. Too loud, too fast, the kind that burned fuel it couldn't afford. Hana let it run. They needed it. In 40 minutes, her people would be boarding Valith warships, something no species had ever attempted, because the Valith were 3 meters tall, armored like architecture, and had been killing things since before humanity discovered fire. Hana's soldiers were smaller, softer, and breakable. They were also creative, in ways that made alien tacticians uncomfortable. The Valith fought with doctrine. Hana's people fought like water, finding cracks, filling gaps, changing shape. She closed the comm channel and sat alone in her boarding craft. The metal walls hummed with the vibration of the asteroid around her. She pressed her palm flat against the hull. Cold, real. She thought about her mother's kitchen, the smell of stew, the sound of rain on the roof. She held the image for 3 seconds, then put it away. She would take it out again later. If there was a later. The Valith fleet reached the coordinates. Torak scanned the area. Empty. Rock, ice, radiation noise. Nothing that registered as a threat on any frequency his systems could read. He opened a channel. "Human Commander, we have arrived at your coordinates. There is nothing here. Explain." Taeho's voice came through clean and calm, relayed from Earth's command center, where he stood watching the same display Jinsu watched. The same red dots, the same geometry. "You're already inside it." Torek's tactical officer shouted something. The first mine detonated against the hull of a forward cruiser, a shaped charge tuned to the resonant frequency of Valith armor plating. The ship didn't explode. It rang. The entire hull vibrated at a frequency that shattered internal systems, killed artificial gravity, and turned the crew's exoskeletons into tuning forks of pain. Then the second mine. The third. The 7th. Dozens. The stealth platforms powered up, emerging from asteroids like teeth from gums. Drone swarms launched in silence, already adapting, already learning, targeting engine arrays and weapon mounts with surgical ugliness. But 600 ships, packed into a kill zone, designed for exactly 600 ships, could not maneuver. They were too close to each other, too deep inside the architecture, and every direction they turned presented a new angle of attack. Hana's boarding craft detached from their asteroids. "Strays," she said over the comm. "Go loud." 12 craft hit 12 crippled Vaylith ships simultaneously. Breaching charges blew through hull plates. Her soldiers poured into alien corridors built for giants, moving low and fast, using the Vaylith's own size against them, in spaces where big meant slow and slow meant dead. Torek watched his fleet map change color. Green to yellow, yellow to red, red to black. Ships he had commanded for decades, crews he had trained, formations that had never broken, falling apart in minutes. He gave an order he had never given in 40 cycles of war. Full stop. But momentum is physics, not obedience. The fleet, inertia, carried it deeper into the kill zone, and the geometry closed behind them like a jaw. On the Paektu, Jinsu watched his architecture perform exactly as designed. He set down his coffee. Bo-young put a hand on his shoulder. On Earth, Taeho stood at his window. The ocean was dark. The tide was going out. He watched it the way he watched everything. Patient, steady, aware that what the water took, it did not give back. The crystal dome of the council chamber turned a color no one in the room had seen before. Somewhere between white and gray, the shade of a system processing something it was not built to process. 12 delegations watched the tactical feed from Sol space and said nothing for a long time. The Vaylith fleet was dying. Not in the way fleets usually died, scattered, retreating, broken into fragments that fled for home. This was different. This was organized, systematic, like watching surgery performed on something still alive. The human kill zone was taking the most powerful military force in the galaxy apart, piece by piece, and the pieces were not fighting back in any way that mattered. The Orovin High Speaker's compound eyes tracked data streams faster than any other species in the room could follow. It ran the engagement against every tactical model in its archive. 11,000 years of warfare data from 300 species across 9 galactic sectors. None of the models matched. The problem was not that humanity was winning. Species won battles. That happened. The problem was that humanity was winning in a way the models said was impossible, using weapons the models said did not exist, deployed from positions the models said were empty. Every assumption the Orovin had built about the human species over 40 years was, in this moment, catching fire. The High Speaker turned to the intelligence cluster, a sub-hive of analyst drones who had spent decades monitoring Earth. The question it asked them was simple. How did we miss this? The answer would take longer to arrive than anyone expected. On Earth, in a basement office 3 floors below Strategic Command, Do-won sat in a chair he had worn the shape of his body into over 10 years. The room was small. 1 desk, 4 screens, a coffee mug with a chip in the rim that he had never replaced, because replacing things meant noticing them, and Do-han did not waste attention on things that did not threaten the species. He was watching 2 feeds. The left screen showed the battle in real time. Jinsu's architecture doing what Jinsu's architecture was built to do. The right screen showed the Orovin Intelligence Network's internal communications, which Do-han had been reading like morning news since before most of his colleagues knew the network existed. The Orovin were panicking, quietly, in the way a hive mind panics, not with screaming, but with recursive loops of analysis that spiraled tighter and tighter without finding ground. They were rerunning their human threat assessment for the 4th time. Each iteration returned the same answer. Class 3 nuisance species. Emotional. Low threat. Do-won had written that assessment. Not directly, not in a way that would ever trace back to him, but over 10 years, through a network of agents, fabricated data streams, curated intelligence leaks, and a patience that bordered on the geological. He had built the picture of humanity that the Orovin believed. Every trade delegation Earth sent to Council Space carried calibrated misinformation in its cargo, sensor data that understated human ship capabilities, scientific papers that described theoretical work as purely academic, economic reports that hid entire sectors of military production behind civilian manufacturing numbers. The Orovin were the galaxy's best intelligence species. They processed more data in an hour than most civilizations generated in a year. And every byte of that data, for the last decade, had been filtered through Doan's machine. He had a team, small, quiet, people who understood that the most important war in human history would be fought with spreadsheets and lies, before it was ever fought with ships and fire. But the decisions were his. The sacrifices were his. He thought about Minji, his wife, former wife. She had left in the 4th year, not because she didn't love him, but because he could not tell her what the work was, and the silence had eaten the space where a marriage used to live. She had asked him once, near the end, to just tell her it mattered. Just that. Not what it was, just that it mattered. He hadn't answered, because answering meant acknowledging the weight, and acknowledging the weight meant risking that it would crush him, and he could not afford to be crushed because the species needed him functional. She left on a Tuesday. He went back to work on Wednesday. The Orovin Hive Queen requested a direct communication channel with Earth. Hive Queens did not speak to individual members of lesser species. It was like a mountain requesting a conversation with a particular grain of sand. Doan accepted the call. The Hive Queen's voice came through the translation layer as something between a chord and a whisper. Your species was assessed. The assessment was thorough. Explain the discrepancy. Doan leaned back in his worn chair. Your assessment was thorough, he agreed, and every piece of data it was built on came from us. Silence from the Hive Queen. In hive mind terms, silence was louder than screaming. You fed us false intelligence, the Hive Queen said. I fed you a story, Doan said. You chose to believe it because it confirmed what you already wanted to think about us. Small species, emotional species, not worth the attention. For how long? 10 years, give or take. The compound weight of 10 years of corrupted analysis settled across the hive mind, like snow on a cracking branch. One individual, the Hive Queen said. You are telling me one individual deceived an entire hive network for a decade. Not one individual, Doan said. One species. We just don't advertise. He closed the channel. He did not smile. The stories would say he smiled. Doan knew how stories worked, how they needed villains to gloat and heroes to grin. But he did not smile. He turned back to his screens and watched the battle continue, and felt nothing that had a name. In Sol space, the engagement entered its 3rd hour. Hana's strays had boarded 9 Valith ships successfully. 3 boarding teams had been lost, crushed, broken, ended in corridors built for creatures twice their size. Hana held each name in a place behind her ribs, where she kept the things she would deal with later. The Valith fought like monuments, huge, powerful, trained across generations to break anything that stood in front of them. But Hana's soldiers didn't stand in front of them. They moved through maintenance shafts the Valith couldn't fit into. They disabled life support systems from junctions the Valith didn't know were junctions. They fought dirty and fast and human, which meant they broke every rule the Valith had learned in 1,000 years of winning. On the bridge of the Ravager of Silences, Torak received reports from his surviving captains. The numbers were simple and terrible. 200 ships disabled, 80 destroyed. The rest tangled in a web of drones and mines that adapted faster than his tacticians could counter. He had studied humans. Before the campaign, he had reviewed every assessment, every briefing, every scrap of data the Orovin provided. 40 combat vessels, primitive weapons, emotional decision-making. Easy. The Orovin assessments were not just wrong. They were a weapon pointed at him, and he hadn't known it until the weapon fired. In the council chamber, the Solari representative floated to the forward edge of its water sphere. Its body pulsed with the slow bioluminescence that the Solari used instead of facial expressions. The color was deep blue, the shade they used for things that could not be taken back. It spoke to the chamber. One sentence, delivered in a voice like tide over stone. "We told you not to do this." No one responded. The crystal dome stayed that nameless color between white and gray, and the tactical feed kept updating, and the numbers kept getting worse, and somewhere in the cold outer ring of an unremarkable star system, the galaxy's oldest assumption about humanity was bleeding out on the floor of its own confidence. Torak was bleeding from 2 of his forearms, and his navigation officer was dead, and his flagship was limping toward Earth on backup engines that screamed like wounded animals. And still, he did not stop. He could not stop. Stopping was a word in other species' languages. The Valith did not have it. They had fought for so long that forward was not a direction anymore. It was biology. He had 112 ships left. Most were damaged. Some were held together by emergency seals and the stubbornness of their crews. The kill zone was behind them now, burned through, spent. A graveyard of drones and mines and the wreckage of ships that had been new when they entered and were nothing when they left. Torak pointed what remained of his fleet at the blue planet and burned hard. Behind him, farther out, 5 more species were coming. The Council had authorized a combined second wave. The Orovin contributing sensor ships, the Taleshi sending fast interceptors, the Morkari deploying heavy siege platforms, and 2 other species adding whatever they could scrape together in 48 hours. The message was blunt. If the Valith alone could not end this, the galaxy would do it together. Teho received Dahwan's intelligence briefing in his office. The numbers were on the screen, but he did not need to read them. Dahwan's voice told him everything. Flat. Precise. The voice of a man delivering facts he had predicted years ago and taken no pleasure in being right about. Second wave. 48 hours out. Combined fleet. Enough firepower to glass every rock between here and Jupiter. Teho looked at the ocean through his window. The tide was coming in now. He watched it climb the shore in its slow, patient way, covering the sand inch by inch, and he thought about his father pulling nets from the water, hands cracked and salted, never taking more than the sea could replace. "Get me Jinsu and Sujin," Teho said. "And Hana. Bring her home." The command staff gathered in a room that was too small for the weight of what they were deciding. Jinsu looked like he had been dragged behind a truck and then asked to solve an equation. Hana attended by secure link from the Pektu, her face lit by the orange glow of a medical bay, where 3 of her wounded were being stabilized. Dohwan sat in the corner and said nothing, because he had already said everything that mattered years ago. Sujin stood by the wall. She was holding a data tablet, the way some people hold a child's hand in a crowd. Tight, protective, afraid of what would happen if she let go. Teho laid it out. The kill architecture was spent. It had been designed for one engagement, one fleet, and it had performed beyond every projection. But it was gone now. Hana's strays were battered, still functional, still dangerous, but not enough for what was coming. The second wave would arrive in 2 days, with more firepower than the first, and this time they would not fly into a trap, because this time they knew the trap existed. "Options," Teho said. Jinsu spoke first. "I can rebuild parts of the grid. 48 hours is tight, but I can get maybe 30% coverage. Enough to slow them, not enough to stop them." Hana's voice came through the link. "My people can fight. Don't pull us out." "I'm not pulling you out," Teho said. "I'm asking what we have." Silence. Taeho looked at Sujin. She had not spoken. She was staring at her tablet, with the expression of someone reading their own autopsy report. Her eyes were the eyes of a person standing at a door they had built themselves and never wanted to open. "It works at any scale," she said. "That's the problem. Threshold." Sujin had built it in a research lab on the dark side of the moon, in a facility that did not appear on any official record, because the things she was building did not belong in any official universe. It was not a weapon in the way the galaxy understood weapons. Weapons destroyed things. Weapons broke matter apart, or burned it, or scattered it. Threshold did none of that. Threshold edited space. The mathematics behind it were beautiful in the way a cliff edge is beautiful, stunning to look at, fatal to step off. Sujin had spent 6 years developing the theory and 3 years building the array, and every night of those 3 years she had dreamed about it. Not nightmares, something worse than nightmares. Dreams where it worked perfectly, where the math held and the field expanded, and everything inside the field simply stopped being dimensional in a way that mattered, and she woke up each time with the knowledge that she had built something that could not be taken back. The array itself was small. That was the obscene part. It sat in a compartment on the lower deck of the Paektu, no bigger than a storage closet, and it contained the capacity to fold a region of space so thoroughly that matter inside it didn't explode or burn. It simplified. It lost dimensions. 3-dimensional objects became 2-dimensional shadows, became 1-dimensional lines, became points, became nothing. And the process was silent and clean, and took 11 seconds. "Can you deploy it before the second wave arrives?" Taeho asked. "I can deploy it in an hour. And the Valith remnant, Torek's ships, they're inside the effective range already. 1 breath. 2. Broadcast to both forces," he said, "the remnant and the incoming wave. Open channel, all frequencies, I'll speak." His voice went out across the Sol system and beyond, carried on every frequency the human comm network could reach, translated in real time into 11 languages. He did not threaten. He did not boast. He described in simple and specific terms what Threshold did. He described the mathematics in language that the Orovin would understand, and the physics in terms that the Talishi engineers would recognize. He told them what would happen to anything inside the field when it activated. He gave them 1 hour to withdraw. On the Ravager of Silences, Torek listened. His remaining bridge crew listened. The translation was clear. The human admiral was telling them that he possessed a weapon that unmade space itself, and he was asking them to leave. Torek's second-in-command looked at him. "If even part of what he describes is real." "It is not real," Torek said. "It is a bluff. They are desperate." He was wrong. He knew he was wrong, the way a falling person knows the ground is coming. Complete certainty, absolute helplessness. But the Valith did not retreat. Retreat was a word in other languages. He had 112 ships, and a course set for the Blue Planet, and 40 cycles of forward momentum, and no other direction his body knew how to go. The hour passed. On the Paektu, Sujin walked to the lower deck alone. The corridor was quiet. She reached the compartment, and placed her hand on the door, and stood there for a moment. And the moment stretched, and in that stretched moment, she thought about the first time she solved a field equation on a whiteboard in graduate school. The chalk dust on her fingers. The joy of it. The pure, stupid joy of understanding something no one else understood. And how that joy had led here, step by step, to a closet-sized machine that could erase a fleet from the fabric of reality. She opened the door. She entered the codes. Her hands shook. The array powered up with a hum so low it was more feeling than sound. She pressed the activation key. The field expanded outward from the Paektu at the speed of changed mathematics. Torek's fleet was inside it before his sensors registered anything. 112 Valith warships did not explode. They did not burn. Hull plating that had withstood 1,000 battles, compressed into geometry that had no name. Crews that had lived and fought and believed in forward ceased to occupy the dimensions required for existence. 11 seconds. Silent. Clean. The incoming second wave dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the system's edge and read the data. Their sensors showed a sphere of space where the laws of physics had been temporarily replaced with something else. Inside the sphere, there was nothing. Not wreckage, not debris. Nothing. No one moved. No one spoke on any channel in any language. On the Paik-2, Sujin watched her monitors confirm full deployment. Every parameter within expected range. Every calculation correct. The most successful weapons test in the history of any species, and she had conducted it on a live battlefield against living beings. She sat on the floor. The metal was cold through her uniform. She put her back against the wall and stared at the monitor from below, and the numbers glowed green. And she sat there, and the numbers stayed green, and Jinsu found her 20 minutes later in exactly that position, on the floor, staring up, breathing, not crying, not speaking, just sitting with the knowledge of what she had built and what it had done and what it could never undo. Taeho opened a channel to the council. His voice was the same as it had always been, low, steady, coastal. We will be sending a delegation. Yuna will lead it. The council chamber was quieter than Yuna had ever heard it. The crystal dome overhead had settled into a pale, exhausted blue, the color of something that had used up all its other colors and had only this one left. Half the delegation sat in reduced numbers. Some seats were empty entirely. The Valet section held a single diplomatic attaché, young, stiff, wearing no campaign markings because there were no campaigns left to mark. He stared at a fixed point on the floor and did not look up when Yuna entered. She wore the same gray suit, the same shoes, the same face she had carried into this room for 6 years, except now the smile was gone, and what was underneath it was worse than anger. It was clarity, the kind that comes after you stop performing and start remembering. 12 species, what was left of them, tracked the small human woman as she crossed the chamber floor, toward the outer ring, toward the little chair pushed against the back wall, where the light didn't reach. Her chair. 43 scratches. She picked it up. It was not heavy. It had never been heavy. That was the insult. They hadn't even given her something substantial enough to struggle with. Just a small, light, forgettable seat in a room full of thrones. She carried it to the inner ring. The delegations in her path shifted without being asked, their bodies moving before their politics could object, and she set the chair down between the Silari water sphere and the Orovin hive cluster. The chair looked wrong there, too small, too plain, too human among the engineered grandeur species who had been governing the galaxy since before Earth had agriculture. Yuna sat down. The chair fit her the same way it always had. She folded her hands on the table, the real table, the one she had watched from a distance for 6 years, while decisions about her species were made without her voice. The High Speaker opened the session. The Orovin Elder's compound eyes moved across the room with a caution that had not been there before. The phrase it used to introduce Yuna's address was not the lesser matter. It was a formal term of recognition, the kind reserved for species that could not be ignored. Yuna noted the change. She filed it in the place where she kept everything, precise, permanent, useful. She stood. She did not hold a data tablet. She did not need one. She began. She did not talk about the war. She did not list human casualties or Valeth losses or the names of the weapons that had ended things. She did not describe Threshold. The room would know about Threshold for the rest of its existence, the way a body knows about the scar that taught it what a knife can do. She talked about 40 years, She talked about the small seat, about the untranslated jokes that she understood because she had learned every language in this room, including the ones they thought she couldn't hear. She talked about the way the Valith checked their schedules during her addresses, the way the Orovin filed humanity under nuisance, the way every species in this chamber had measured her people for a cage they called provisional status and expected gratitude for the fitting. Her voice did not rise. It did not crack. It did not tremble. It was level and clear, and operated with the precision of something that had been sharpened over 6 years of silence, into an edge that could open a room without raising its volume. She talked about what it costs a species to smile, to bow, to thank, to sit in the smallest chair and be told it is enough. To do this for decades, not out of weakness, but out of a patience so deliberate it functioned as strategy. She said that humanity had learned something in that chair that no weapon could teach, what it feels like to be underestimated by an entire galaxy, and how to use that feeling as fuel for something the galaxy was not prepared for. She spoke for 9 minutes. When she finished, she sat down. She folded her hands on the table again, in the same position, as if she had never stood. On Earth, Tejo watched the broadcast from his office. The ocean filled the window behind him, gray and slow under a winter sky. He listened to Yuna's address with his eyes closed, not because he needed to concentrate, but because he already knew how it ended. He had known how it ended for 9 years. The knowing had not made it lighter. He turned off the feed. He stood. He walked outside. The air was cold and tasted like salt. The shore was empty. No one else was there, just the water and the rocks and the low sound of the tide doing what the tide always did. Coming in, going out, taking what it took, returning what it chose. Tejo stood at the edge and watched the waves hit the rocks and thought about 600 ships that were not ships anymore, and the people who had been inside them who were not people anymore, and the fact that he had given the order that made that true, and the fact that he would give it again, and the fact that both of those things lived in him at the same time, and neither one canceled the other out. He stayed at the shore until the cold reached his bones. Then he went back inside. On the Paektu, in a medical bay that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, Hana sat beside Kyung-ho's bed. His right leg was rebuilt below the knee with temporary scaffolding that would hold until they reached a proper surgical facility. He was conscious, medicated, and making jokes about his funeral again. "You promised a short eulogy," he said. "You're not dead. Still want to hear it." Hana looked at him. He was 24 years old and had boarded a Valith warship with a breaching charge and a sidearm, and come back missing a piece of himself. She thought about the 3 who hadn't come back at all. She held their names behind her ribs, where they pressed against the things she would deal with later and later and later. "He was annoying," she said. "He lived. Next item." Kyung-ho laughed. It sounded like something trying to grow in bad soil. Hana did not laugh. She patted his shoulder once, firmly, the way she touched everything, like she meant it, and also like she was already letting go. In the corridor outside the medical bay, she leaned against the wall and closed her eyes and breathed and counted the names. 3. They would get heavier with time, the way all carried things did, and she would carry them anyway, because that was the deal. You sent people into the dark, and some of them didn't come back, and you carried the ones who didn't, and you kept sending, because the alternative was a galaxy that looked at your species and saw furniture. 3 floors below Jinsu's engineering deck, someone had draped a jacket over him while he slept at his console. The screens in front of him still displayed readouts from the kill architecture, performance data, efficiency metrics, the clinical vocabulary of a machine designed to end lives at scale. He had built it. He had watched it work. And now he slept the sleep of a man whose body had finally overruled his mind, slumped over a keyboard, dreaming about drive cores and basement labs, and the first time he took something alien apart and understood it better than the species that built it. The jacket was Boyoung's. She stood a few meters away, checking secondary systems, letting him sleep, saying nothing, because nothing was the right thing to say. In his office beneath Strategic Command, Dowon deleted files, one by one, methodically. 10 years of intelligence operations, fabricated data streams, agent communications, network architectures, the entire skeleton of the machine that had deceived a galactic hive mind into believing humanity was harmless. Every file was evidence. Every file was a weapon, and every weapon, once the war was won, was a liability. He deleted them the way he did everything, without ceremony, without sentiment. The screen cleared, and cleared, and cleared, and when it was done the office was the same small room it had always been. One desk, 4 screens, a chipped coffee mug. Except now the screens were empty, and the room was just a room, and the man in it was just a man who had given 10 years, and a marriage, and most of his ability to sleep through the night, and who now sat in the silence he had built, and listened to it, and found it was not the silence of peace, but the silence of a house after everyone has left. He sat there for a long time. In the lowest deck of the Paektu, Sujin stood in front of the threshold array. It was powered down, cold. The compartment was dim, and the machine was small and ordinary-looking, the way all terrible things are ordinary when they are not being terrible. The metal was cool against her palm. She stood there and did not speak, because there was nothing to say to a machine. And she did not cry because crying was for things that could be grieved, and this was not grief. It was knowledge, hard and permanent. The knowledge that she had changed the shape of what was possible, and could never change it back. In the council chamber, Yuna waited. The Solari representative moved forward in its sphere. The same one who had voted no. The same one who had looked at her with something she couldn't name. Its bioluminescence shifted to a deep, ancient gold, the color the Solari used for truths that took a long time to become visible. It spoke. The translation came through slow and heavy, like stone settling. It said that the Solari had watched species rise for 10,000 cycles, that the loud ones were easy to predict. The conquerors, the swarmers, the devourers, they announced themselves, and the galaxy prepared. But humanity had done something the Solari had only seen once before. In a species so old its name had become a word for patience in 6 languages. Humanity had announced itself with silence. Not the silence of weakness, the silence of a species that understood time, that could sit in a small chair for 40 years, and smile, and learn, and build, and when the moment came, move with a precision that made millennia of preparation look like an afternoon's work. That patience, the Solari said, was more dangerous than any weapon. Weapons could be matched. Patience could not. Yuna listened. She did not react. Her face was still, and her hands were folded, and she received the words the way the shore receives the tide, without resistance, without gratitude, as something that was always going to arrive. The Solari finished. The chamber was silent. Yuna waited 3 seconds, then asked for the next item on the agenda. Later, alone on her shuttle, she opened a drawer in the console compartment. Inside was her diplomatic insignia, the small silver pin she had removed the day the war was declared. It sat on a folded cloth, exactly where she had left it. She looked at it for a long time. She did not put it back on. She did not throw it away. She closed the drawer and set course for Earth. Behind her, the stars did what the stars always did, burned in the dark, indifferent and ancient, unchanged by the small and enormous things that happened between them. Ahead of her, the blue planet waited, turning slowly in its old light, patient as it had always been, carrying its people the way it carried its oceans, faithfully, without comment, toward whatever came next.